Welcome to Grown Up Storytime 140. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, cool. My name's Emily. I produce this show with
Claire.
yeah, and this month is special because we have a guest producer, Brenda Valdivia. But before we bring her on, we have a couple of just housekeeping notes for you all.
Brenda is also our host this evening, so you.
Oh yeah.
Show. But yeah, let's get some business out of the way. Like we like to pay our artists, so thank you for coming. But hopefully you could help us out with usually Grown Up Storytime is $7. It's a very affordable and wonderful date night, as I've been told. But we would love to continue paying our artists, and so we have a Grown Up Storytime Houston Venmo, and just tossing us a couple dollars really goes a long way for us to just compensate people for their time and their creativity.
The handle will be in the description of the video. I'll put it on social media, but it's at GUST Houston. It's GUST Houston on Venmo. If you don't have Venmo and you still want to support, just contact us and we'll figure it out.
Yes, we will help you figure out how to be generous.
Yes. We also want to remind you what our email is for story submissions. It is grownupstorytimehouston@gmail.com. It's a rolling submission date. Storytime happens every month, so it's not like there's a hard deadline. But if you want to get it in for the next Storytime, the general rule of thumb is just 1 week before. So Storytime's always on the third Tuesday, so that makes the deadline the second Tuesday of the month. But you can send it to us anytime. There's generally no themes coming up, and also we're always here to work with you on stories. If you have a draft you want us to look over or need a prompt or anything like that, we want to help you. We want to read your stories. We like doing it, so please send them to us and we can help you get it ready if it's not.
And new writers too. If you are a brand new writer, we are a very loving portal to your stories. And we will have, so we're having our guest producer this month, and this is part of a new commitment that we've made to include voices from the community that otherwise may not have a platform that is established as this one, for them to use and for them to bring in new people and new writers to the community. So this month is Brenda, and in 2 months, in November, we will have Shayna Schlossberg, who is pretty well known as being our managing director of Catastrophic Theater, but she is also involved in lots of social organizations in Houston, and I'm so excited because she is so cool. So yeah, look forward to that in November.
And I think that kind of is wrapping us up for the housekeeping stuff. So we just want to remind you one more time that our Venmo handle is at GUST Houston. We really appreciate any help you can give us. We pass it straight along to the artists. And also a reminder, if you don't have Venmo but want to help, just reach out to us. We'll figure it out. We have PayPal. We accept carrier pigeons with cash tied to their feet. I'll do it. I'll open my door to that pigeon.
What will your cat say? What will Dizzy say about that?
I'll keep it on the patio.
Glad you have a plan for this. Great. Let's let Brenda get this show started.
Yay! Welcome, Brenda.
Welcome. I'm Brenda Valdivia, and this is Grown Up Storytime number 140. You know, this is the third time I've hosted, or is this the second time? Or the third time I've been on the show? I don't know. Anyway, normally we would be on the second floor of Rudyard's, and frankly, I miss it. I miss a lot of you. I miss going to the secret group. I miss Rudyard's. I miss going to different bars and locations and enjoying all the things that make Houston, Houston to me. So I thought I'd bring Houston to you. Some of the rioters are in different locations. If you recognize some of the locations where we're recording, go ahead and comment on the bottom. It helps spread the word of Grown Up Storytime, and it helps connect Houstonians with each other. So let's get started with the show, yeah? Okay. The first submitter is anonymous, and normally I would tell you the title of the story right now, but frankly, I think it gives too much of the story away right off the bat. So we're just going to dive right in.
My name is Tandiwe Kone. The intentions behind Bumble started out great. Of all of the dating apps I've ever tried, it was by far my favorite. For those who have the misfortune of not understanding the World Wide Web of dating, it originally put women in control to send the first message to their potential suitor. This was to help alleviate the burden of unsolicited pictures of random penises men, for whatever reason, believe will entice women to fall head over heels for them. It was one of the few apps I've ever had success with. Success enough to where I had more options willing to respond to me than the agoraphobic gamers. Not that there's anything wrong with that lifestyle, but it's not ideal for my extroverted companionship. Or my personal favorite, the casual white supremacist with a racial fetish. OkCupid is full of those. But that's another story, because slave fantasies are a role my theater degree did not prepare me for. T was incredibly handsome. An oil and gas analyst from Monterrey, Mexico. He had soft green eyes and light olive skin, light brown hair, and a very neat gentleman's cut, a crooked little smile, and a fantastic build. Toned muscles like a soccer player, my exact aesthetic. Not to mention his Oxford tucked into his khakis were hugging in all the right places. We met after work for happy hour at Edison. Our conversation was great. I don't believe in small talk, especially on a date, meaning I may not ask where you stand in our involvement in Syria within the first 5 minutes of ordering an old-fashioned. However, I do not subscribe to the idea that politics and religion are off limits. It's important to me to have a genuine connection with somebody, as well as to not waste your time or mine. There are certain ideological issues that I stand firmly on and need to be in absolute agreement with a partner. Chalk it up to dating in the age of Trump. We discussed his time in Mexico, growing up, and the skewed American vision of how the country operates. We talked about travel and our siblings and how both had influenced who we were in that moment in time. We watched a young couple, perceivably already in a relationship, sit across from each other on their respective phones, miserably endure one another, and parlay their presence into defining our intentions and end goal of being on Bumble. I shared that I was interested in seeing someone from the app and seeing where it goes, with the potential of becoming boyfriend and girlfriend in due time. He was looking for something more casual. The shareable plates were delish. My 2 cocktail minimum, a little rule I have for myself on first dates, were treating me right. And our honest conversation left me with a smile as we hugged each other goodnight outside the bar. His polished white sports car was just as handsome as he. We both feigned that we could do this maybe once more before maybe making a decision on whether or not to continue these outings. Leaving Edison, named for the inventor, and surrounded by the romantic mood lights of his bulbs, a robust conversation wasn't enough to spark any electricity. a mutual feeling. So, to my surprise, the next day I received a text message from T. You didn't ask me about my extracurricular activities. Coffee in hand, mid-teaching, I simultaneously tried to replay the nature of our conversation from the night prior while reminding my students to stay on task in their rehearsal groups. Let's see, he helped me pronounce his surname with my new Spanish language skills courtesy of Duolingo. We bonded over trying to maintain the balance of an active lifestyle while fighting the fatigue of our respective work days. We disagreed on the best fast food chains that the U.S. had to offer. What activity could he be referring to? Truly dumbfounded, I asked for a hint after reading over his profile biography once more. Him, my being an escort. Me, what? It was then that I scrolled up to the beginning of our 3-day conversation. Me, hi, so what is this career you're so focused on? Him, escort. Me, so what? You just jump on here to meet someone your age every now and then? Him, yeah, pretty much. Him, so where do you like to hike? Me, shares anecdote of national park visits. Often on these apps, people open with a joke or a line sometimes. The cheesy, sometimes in regard to what's on your profile, right? Surely there's no way that responsive escort was real. Now I needed details. I shamelessly gave up my attention to my students claiming I needed to send an email and ask them to proceed in rehearsal without me until further notice. I was furiously typing, not out of anger, but genuine intrigue. This was an oil and gas guy, not some gigolo, right? Me, but you told me about your oil and gas job. Me, wait, was last night, was that you working? Me, are you serious? I thought you were just trying to be funny with that response. T, the successful businessman, sometimes slept with older women for gifts and money. He was not joking. After getting over the initial shock and quite frankly embarrassment that I have just gone on a date with an escort, I decided to take last night's candid conversation into current curiosities. I asked when and how it started, how long he had done this for, his oldest client, whether or not he had an agency, the best gift he received, the terms and conditions of the services he provided, why he did it or does it. This had yet to be determined at the time, how much he made and whether or not the sex was good. He answered. A co-worker who had been obviously lusting after him for over a year invited him to a wedding. At the end of the night, she made her offer and he rejected it. She revised her offer with money and he accepted. This had gone on for years. The oldest person the 33-year-old had been with was 55. He was an independent contractor, no agency, just word-of-mouth referrals through the original source of her group of old rich friends. His best gift was the gorgeous vehicle he drove up to and from Edison. He explained that he was open to any and all options. There was the occasional no-sex client who simply needed a +1 to an event or companionship in an empty, lonely mansion. But he was also open-minded to the clients wishing to live out sexual desires their decrepit husbands either could not or would not fulfill. He was honest that most clients had libidos no longer in unison with their partners. Partners they either loved so much that they hadn't the heart to confess how unsatisfactory their sex life was, or partners they loathed and had no desire to touch. Aware that they, too, seek outside help for their sexual needs. He confessed that he did not need the money, but did so because he enjoys the accommodation from the services and the sex isn't bad or different. A follow-up question I had regarding the ages. He didn't feel comfortable telling me how much he makes from it, or rather the estimated value of his actions. He was very candid that he enjoys sex in general, and that includes sex with these women. He mentioned he disliked the encounters in which his orgasm was not considered, but understood his purpose as a boy toy in these situations, and that the best clients cared mutually about the overall experiences of them both. Although he was not currently hired, he was not opposed to being hired in the future. He also reassured me that working the night before that he wasn't working the night before and was genuinely interested in me. Ultimately, the answer that he was open to other business solidified what we already knew, that we weren't right for each other. I can forgive him for his past. I mean, is forgive the right word? Accept. I could accept his past. We had a very sex-positive conversation the entire afternoon and agreed that sex work is valid. However, the idea that he could and would continue such actions in the future if given the opportunity wasn't what I wanted. I wouldn't want to share. I thanked him again for his honesty and feeding my Detective Benson level investigation. At this point in the day, school was well into the 6th period class. I called my parents that night to tell them about the date and update to what I had only hours ago said went well but was uneventful. Somehow morphed into one of the most bizarre and interesting future bar stories I'd ever keep in my arsenal. In the truest nature of my parents, they laughed out loud in jest on speakerphone at another dating fail. When you're childhood sweethearts and married for 30 plus years, you just don't get it. They told me they loved me and gave me the usual "you'll find the right guy" pep talk before wishing me a good, less eventful rest of my week. It was Wednesday. I can always one-up the bad date, interesting date, WTF date, comparing contests that amuse singles and couples alike. Mostly reassuring couples that sticking it out together might be better than trying to navigate the virtual dating world. If you're in a relationship, you're welcome for the reminder. If you're single, all my support and whiskey to you, and your woes and cheers. This really is one of my favorite bar stories now. Thank you.
Did I mention that all of our readers and writers are paid? Yeah, that's right. So if you'd like to support those readers and writers, you can even Venmo us. You can Venmo at GUST Houston. That's at GUST Houston on Venmo. And if you don't have Venmo, you can still email us to ask us how to support us. So don't hesitate. Get in contact with us and let us know. Going up in front of strangers to spill your guts out is not easy, especially when they don't exactly like how you're saying what you need to say on stage. But sometimes you power through. Is that going to be the case in this story? I don't know. This is a story called When They Hiss at You by Sarah Bellum and read by Royal Hernandez-Millen.
Hi there, I'm Royal. I'm going to be reading When They Hiss at You. First and foremost, I'm a poet. It is difficult to say because, like any writer, I don't feel like I can say I'm an author without a book that's published. I've been doing poetry since I was a teenager, and I was introduced to it differently than most. My city where I lived for most of my life, Chicago, is the birthplace of slam poetry in the United States. That's where my introduction to performance started. The Green Mill Jazz Club was the birthplace of my poetry background. It's near Andersonville in Chicago and at an old speakeasy that was the site of an Al Capone doing some deals back in the day. So it was kind of scary. There are still bullet holes where we perform on the stage. So this explains well what my first experiences was like. To start things off, this is an open mic for new poets to speak. One of my first times performing, I noticed the crowd was nicer than it can be. In the Green Mill Jazz Club, you are encouraged to boo and stomp and hiss, and generally get a poet off the stage if you don't like them. Sometimes the noise of the audience was a little overwhelm the poet's voice, and they will concede and run off. I was set to perform next. The MC told the audience they were too kind to the poet coming up. He told them to boo, stomp, and hiss and make all the noise to let the poets know we sucked. At that moment, he brought me on, and I stepped up onto the stage. The light was blinding like a spotlight. I couldn't escape. But I couldn't shake the enthusiasm in my veins to speak. I had printed out my poetry, but I had to memorize it. The paper shook in my hands as I held it behind me. The name of the poem was Poetic Peep Show, and it was a small piece. I was speaking the poem from memory and paused because I lost my poem. The crowd started to stomp and hiss their feet, or hiss and stomp their feet. I heard it out in the audience. They were telling me that it wasn't good enough to stay on the stage. I thought of all the performers before me. Their sweat soaking in the same spot where my feet were at, their hands shaking just like mine at the exact time I'm stuck in. I thought of being in front of Al Capone's bullets, holes behind me in the brick wall. All this culminated to the statement I said in my head. I said, "Fuck them." Even though I was a teenager at the time, I opened my eyes. I had closed them to remember the words I had lost. They seeped from my mind like sand from cracks of your fingertips. I stared right out into the blinding light. Jazz played behind me, tentatively chords, piano keys plucking on the right tune to my words. I moved forward with my poem and the crowd hushed. I said my words, slide a quarter into my slot for another view. Those were the last words. Once I finished, I was shaking, and my anxiety had almost driven me to a panic attack. The crowd erupted in applause when moments before they were hissing at me. The fire of enthusiasm for public speaking had been sparked then, and it wouldn't be extinguished. That is why you see me today, speaking of my love of words and experiences for those without a voice to be heard. Thank y'all. Have a good show. San Francisco.
You know what occurred to me? It didn't occur to me. This is based on the story. People have secrets. I have secrets. Some of them good, some of them bad, some of them mine. But sometimes somebody just becomes the person who has everybody's secrets. In that case, it's Emily Hynds. Every time a person submits an anonymous story, she's the one who knows who that anonymous person is. Technically, she's the most powerful person I know. If you want to know how she does it and how she thinks about all of us, our next story is called Secrets, written by Emily Hynds and read by Michelle Iracheta. Sit back and enjoy.
Secrets by Emily Hynds. Sometimes I think I know too much about people, and also wonder why they feel okay with me knowing as much as I do. There are three main factors that contribute to this. Number one, I co-produce a monthly storytelling event. It's called Grown-Up Storytime. You may have heard of it. I read so many of your stories, even the ones that don't get performed. that no audience ever sees. I read them. Even the ones that say anonymous on the program, I usually know who wrote them. Number 2, I am a pet caretaker, which gives me access into people's homes and their private lives more than the average acquaintance. I see the state of people's houses. I know what's in their cabinets and nightstands and pantries. I get these weird, intimate glances into people's lives that most of their friends and a lot of their family never get. Number 3, I've lived in one place my entire life. I find this to be a rare quality amongst my peers. I was born in Houston, and although I've changed neighborhoods, I have never left. I have been building community in one geographical location for 36 years straight. Recently, I had a Paw and Order client. That's right. That's my pet care business name. Tell me that I'm in her inner circle of knowledge as she shared intimate details about why her family needed my services for a longer period of time than usual. I told her that I appreciated her confidence, but that she didn't owe me anything. I tried to be empathetic and a good listener, because it seemed like she didn't just want to explain herself to her cat sitter. She wanted someone to listen. Am I a good listener? I can't say. But I do have 13 years experience in processing other people's stories. I know what kind of bread they like. I often know what they ate for breakfast and what kind of toothpaste brand they use and whether they recycle or not. I know if they make their own beds in the morning. I know if they do their own chores or have maids, if they water their lawn, and how much money they spend on their animals' food and medicine, or on me. I literally have keys to their sanctuaries. I know what you did last summer. I know about the terrible breakup you had. I know you were raped. I know you suspect you have undiagnosed autism. I know how you really feel about your parents. But why do I get to know these things? Is there a quality in me that makes it okay? I've shared stories too. You know about my ex that cheated on me, about that time I peed myself at Renfrow when I was a kid, about betrayals I've experienced and enacted against others. Why do we choose to share what we share and with whom we share it with? I think a lot about being a steward of other people's secrets. Or not secrets necessarily, but of the information they have shared with me and how it should or shouldn't change how I think about them. My occupations have made me so much more empathetic than I otherwise could have been. I'm thankful every day for the trust that people put in me. I think about it all the time and wonder what I did to deserve it. Thank you.
Baby, please forgive me, 'cause I'm not used to this. I've never known such hunger on both sides.
If you like to submit a story, including anonymously, you can submit a story to Grown Up Storytime, because there's always a show coming around the corner, usually monthly, every third Tuesday of the month, but you know, we're feeling really fancy, so who knows. But if you'd like to submit a story, you can email us at grownupstorytimehouston@gmail.com. All the stories are verified and looked over by our producers, and we choose the best readers for your story, so don't hesitate. Gross. overwhelming. Do you call a friend, say their name, twist a pen in your hand, click your tongue? What do you do? How do you get from surviving to thriving? And what does that path look like? Daniel Renfrow submitted this story called Stop Smelling Your Hands, and it's read today by Cote. Stick around and watch, okay?
Stop Smelling Your Hands by Daniel Renfrow. Daniel, stop smelling your hands. My mother snarled as she swatted my tiny, second-grader hand away from my face. I was hiding behind her floor-length Pentecostal-approved skirt like I usually did while at church, in part because I was too socially anxious to be more than a few feet away from her, and in part because the sensory issues caused by my undiagnosed autism made me feel the need to have a physical anchor on which to ground myself while in public, to help me better cope with the swirling, nauseating sensation I felt while being baked under the fluorescent lights and pummeled by the clanging, cacophonous sounds that are all too common in public spaces. I'd later learn that this tossed-at-sea feeling I had experienced in loud, bright, and busy places has a name: sensory overload, and that the feeling can be alleviated by finding a cold, dark, and quiet place in which to retreat. But back then, my mother's Pentecostal sartorial choices, her penchant for long and stiff floor-length skirts that contained all the pizzazz of long, ash-smeared sackcloth, which her penitent fundamentalist Christian self would have probably preferred to denim had she possessed the self-confidence necessary for her to more fully lean into her roiling Christian self-hatred, provided me with the anchor I needed to keep my tiny autistic body from totally drowning in the churning sea of sensory overload. In response to the stress caused by the constant overloading of my senses, I would be besought by uncontrollable tics. My tics were already almost constantly occurring by that point in my life, but they came out in tsunami-like waves when I felt extra stressed or anxious. And so I smelled my hands and blinked my eyes extra hard, and I flicked my fingers and I licked my lips and I snapped my wrists and I opened my mouth up extra wide like a freshly caught fish, gasping for air before further contorting my face into a demonic grimace. And then to cope with the discomfort caused by the uncontrollable urge to perform my tics, I stimmed. By flapping my hands, by twisting and rocking my body, and by quietly repeating words and phrases and sounds over and over and over and over and over again, silently in my head, until I felt like I had repeated them just right. I didn't understand then that my tics were a symptom of Tourette syndrome, and that they were involuntary. Just like I didn't understand then that my stims, my frequent sensory overload, and my toddler-like level of interpersonal skills, which I can assure you are now safely at a preteen level, were a result of my autism. While my tics made me feel bad, my stims were self-soothing and made me feel good, even though they looked very much the same to an outside observer, and I myself didn't have the self-reflection nor the vocabulary at that age to distinguish between the two of them. What I did understand at that age, however, was that since my mother was embarrassed by my demonic movements emanating from my body, I should be embarrassed by them as well. That experience at church was when I first became aware of my tics and my stims. Until then, they had been an unconscious part of the natural movements of my body. As with most children of that age, I was severely lacking in corporeal awareness, and that had been a good thing, because that meant for a time I was blissfully unaware that my autistic flapping, twisting, and twirling, coupled with the itching, uncontrollable, and uncomfortable sensations I felt all over my body, sensations that could only be relieved by blinking my eyes extra hard or scrunching my face into an ungodly affect, made me look like a particularly impish, young, church-going tweaker. When one Sunday, a few weeks after my mother's reprimand, a young woman at our church refused to hold my smelling hand during the parting song we sang at the end of every service, a song in which all of the congregants would join hands with the people next to them to create a solid chain of hand-holding down every aisle before breaking out in unison into a particularly culty and dirge-like closing melody. I more fully grasped my situation. I was a freak. I should be ashamed of my demonic impulses and hedonistic body gyrations, and I should probably climb up a tree and never come back down again. Although I thought my tics were bad in elementary school, they really came into their own when I entered into middle school. I had never had any real friends as a kid, but the way my elementary school had been set up, assigned seating at lunch and staggered recesses, meant that there were fewer people to play with at recess or to eat lunch with. That being so, I was seen as a more viable social and play option by my peers. Since there was no assigned seating at my middle school during lunch, I either sat at a table by myself while drowning in so much anxiety and sensory overload that I would get dizzy and my vision would blur, or on lucky days I would manage to sneak into a bathroom without a teacher seeing me so I could drink my juice boxes, consumed my tear-soggy sandwiches, and perform my tics and stims, which I still didn't know the cause of, away from the menacing eyes of my peers. Although my social skills had improved a bit by the time I entered into high school, they were still nowhere near the level of what my peers, and my tics were just as bad, if not worse, than they had been in middle school. I also still didn't have any friends, and that meant that in spite of the fact that the high school I attended had an unusually large student body, my time spent at school was exceedingly lonely. Every day, as soon as I got home from school, I would curl up in a ball on my bed and cry as my body was overtaken by all of the tics I had held in during the school day. By the time I entered into high school, I had also realized that I was gay, and that only added to my misery. Around my 10th grade year, the faithful and obedient Christian I had always been up until that point made a decided turn towards wickedness when I started routinely selling my soul to Satan with the expressed request each time that he would cure me of my tics and give me some friends. Maybe just one? I would be fine with just one friend. My Faustian bargains never ended up working out, but selling my soul to the devil, even if it was ever only temporary, was a great way for me to explore my burgeoning homosexuality. On the days in which I had sold my soul to the devil, since I was no longer a Christian and was thereby no longer bound by biblical law, I would stay up super late, like past 10 o'clock, in my family's entertainment room while pretending to read my Bible. Then, after all the good Christians in the house had gone to sleep, I would sneak over to the family computer, being extra careful not to awaken anyone in the house with my clickety-clack of my newly cloven feet. And with stealthy wickedness, I would print out shirtless photos of celebrities I had crushes on. Hot pieces of ass like Jake Gyllenhaal, Josh Hartnett, Heath Ledger, Enrique Iglesias, and Ryan Phillippe. Before rushing to the bathroom with my newly acquired spank bank, after each furious sin session was over, I would carefully place my sister's cucumber melon-scented body lotion back in the bathroom cabinet in exactly the same place and exactly the same angle in which I had found it, before tearing my spank bank up into tiny little pieces and flushing it down the toilet. I'd watch with sadness each time as the shredded pieces of Ryan Phillippe's plump and juicy ass would turn soggy before twerking their way down the drain. Back at school the next day, when I would start my face scrunching and hard blinking again, I'd feel the urge to perform my hand-smelling tic and cucumber melon. The smell of sin, the smell of moral failure, the smell of my betrayal of Christ. As soon as I could, I would rush to the bathroom to frantically Lady Macbeth my hands and to rededicate my soul to Christ. In my rededication, I'd explain why I'd sold my soul to Beelzebub in the first place, and then I'd tell Christ that I would come back into his camp under the express condition that he would also rid me of my tics and gift me some friends. This constant shifting of allegiance between the forces of darkness and the forces of light went on throughout my remaining time in high school, while my tic situation and friendlessness remained the same. Until eventually, after graduation, I tired of the constant spiritual whiplash and decided to permanently align myself with the devil, and in doing so, fully embrace my degeneracy. The year after high school graduation, my homosexuality and my secret apostasy was going pretty well. I was making great grades at the local community college I was attending. I had come out to the few friends I had at the time, even though I wouldn't really consider any of those people friends by the friendship standards I have today. And I had obtained my first boyfriend. Besides my still chronic issues with my tics, I was doing okay for me, even though pretty much every single social interaction I had still left me feeling like a confused alien who had just crash-landed on an uncharted planet and hadn't yet the time to master the social mores of that planet's dominant species. Things were doing fine, going okay, that is, until I made the mistake one night of posting something along the lines of, "Daniel is... I'm gay and I don't care who knows it," on the relatively lawless wasteland that was a 2008 Facebook. Somehow the news of my hackneyed online verbal porridge got back to my mother, surprise, who confronted me soon after at our kitchen table. She asked me if I was gay. And I shook my head yes, as my whole body was overcome with tics and as a steady stream of tears flowed down my face. She told me that being gay was a sin, and that she wanted me to go to gay conversion therapy, and that she had actually already looked up all of the information on it, and that I could start going the following week since she had already made an appointment for me with a gay conversion therapist. When I finally steadied myself and regained the use of my vocal cords, I told her that attending gay conversion therapy wasn't something I was interested in doing. I spent the next several years of my life being more or less disowned by her. My father, who has a normal level of empathy, and who actually has many of the traits of autism and a tic disorder himself, agreed to continue paying my college tuition, so I was more lucky than most. But I was going to have to move out and to pay for my new living expenses by myself. This was quite a tall feat for myself, considering, as like most autistic people in their late teens, especially ones who had not yet been diagnosed and had therefore not benefited from any of sort of therapy to help them improve their social skills or increase their level of executive function, I was operating at an Amelia Bedelia-like level of executive function, while below that of my same-age peers. My early college years were a blur, and as I struggled to maintain my grades while also working full-time, often at multiple simultaneous jobs, my depression, which had been a pretty constant presence in my life since the start of middle school, got deeper and deeper. I still didn't understand then that I had Tourette syndrome, and that I was autistic as fuck. And I didn't understand why things that came so easily to other people were so hard for me to do. Things like holding down a job, maintaining my grades at school, paying bills and managing money, sustaining conversations with other people, maintaining eye contact while talking to someone, maintaining friendships and romantic relationships, knowing the proper way to douche before a rigorous session of anal sex, knowing how to keep the conversation flowing with the random trucker I had just met up with from a M4M ad on Craigslist so there were no awkwardly pregnant pauses in the conversation before our fuck session in his storage unit. The list was never ending. Eventually, after a particularly brutal semester in which I was working 3 jobs while attending school full-time, all while struggling to manage the suicidal ideation that had been a constant in my life since high school, and while feeling exceedingly sorry for myself, I had a nervous breakdown and decided it was finally time for me to kill myself. I didn't show up for work that day, and instead drove to a building at my university that I had for a long time longed to jump off of. I eventually texted my mother about my intention to jump off the building, hoping she would come to my rescue, and she texted me back something along the lines of, "You need to grow up and start acting like an adult." I fortunately didn't end up jumping off the building that day, but that's only because I eventually decided that I'd much prefer driving to San Francisco so I could jump off the Golden Gate Bridge. I had never visited California before, but I had always wanted to experience its preternaturally decent weather and relish in its scenic natural landscape that was deliciously pocked with extremely jumpable edifices. I spent the next couple of nights sleeping in my car in random parking lots as my final pilgrimage took me closer and closer to sunny San Francisco. My eventual goal was to kersplat myself on the cold and what I imagined to be beautifully tempestuous waters of the San Francisco Bay, but I figured I would at least have some kinky sex with a stranger in an alley somewhere once I got to the city. One last bang before my final bang. I hoped both of them would be life-shattering. My dad's father, my pépère, had killed himself when I was 20. I'll spare you the gory details of how. And my dad's mother, my Granny Lou, is a supremely loony character who has been in and out of psychiatric facilities for much of her adult life. Her mother, whose name I don't even know, Sylvia Plath herself, before I was born, and it was my teenage father who discovered her limp and lightly broiled body. This undoubtedly explains why my father, who was often the one who ferried his mother back to and from psychiatric hospitals as a kid, was so quick to extend his support to me while I was having my nervous breakdown. While my mother was busy furiously texting me that I was being a brat, and that she had every single person in her main prayer group, and every single person in all of her side prayer groups, and every single person in the prayer groups that jutted off her side prayer groups, praying hard to Jesus that I would stop being so bratish, my father put in the work of locating a local psychiatric hospital that had an open bed for me. He eventually coaxed me back from my potentially deadly road trip. I'd have to put my planned alley fucking in sunny San Francisco temporarily on pause. and I spent the next 2 weeks in a mental health facility having my neurotransmitter fire-hosed with some much-needed psychiatric medications. When I got out of the hospital, I moved back in with my parents and was eventually diagnosed with bipolar disorder. My Tourette syndrome, which I had realized I had at that point, but whose symptoms had lessened to the point where I didn't feel like I necessarily needed a diagnosis for it, and my autism, which I still didn't realize I had escaped detection by my psychiatrist. I thought with my new diagnosis of a mood disorder that my time at home would be easier this time around, but I was incredibly wrong in that estimation. After a few weeks of living at home, my mother confronted me about the R-rated movies that I had been watching late at night on her and my father's Netflix account. She told me that my proclivity for adult-themed films was releasing demonic energy into the house that was causing her to have impure dreams and my little sister to have nightmares, and so she demanded that I no longer watch any movies in her house that were rated higher than PG-13. When I celebrated my 23rd birthday a few weeks later, my mother gifted me an unwrapped bottle of multivitamins and said something along the lines of, "Happy birthday, Daniel. You look anemic, so I brought you some multivitamins for your birthday." The last time I had lived at home while I was in the process of transferring from Texas State to the University of Houston, I'd forgot to log out of my email one night, and my mother went through all of my deleted messages and discovered that I had been meeting up with random men from Craigslist for sex. This was before the advent of Grindr and other gay dating apps. She had kicked me out soon after, and then told everyone at her church that I was a gay prostitute, and that she was so happy that now that I was out of her house, my little sister would no longer be exposed to my demonic gay energy. My mother believed then, and probably still believes now, that homosexuality, along with a host of other things like alcoholism, depression, infidelity, and curiously enough, autism, are caused by demonic possession. I had the foresight this time around to know that my time living under the same roof as my mother was limited, and after a few months of enduring the heat of her face-melting passive aggression, I met my now husband and moved in with him. It all happened far too quickly, but it ended up eventually working out. It took me a few years to adjust to being medicated, but eventually I found the right combination of psych meds and slowly but surely the right dosage for each one of them. And as I needed the help of my mother less and less, I found that my hatred for her diminished to a simple indifference to her existence. My husband is an exceptionally social human being, and being thrown to the wolves several nights a week at local dive bars helped me to steadily, through much trial and error, improve my interpersonal skills. Around the same time I was starting to get better at socializing with other people, I started researching Asperger's syndrome. And after reading several books on the subject, and after watching countless hours of videos of people with Asperger's discussing their experiences living with the condition, people who looked and sounded exactly like me, many of whom who had not been formally diagnosed until well into their adult years after their first self-diagnosis, I realized that the only thing that could possibly explain my unique list of strengths and deficits was that I was, in fact, on the spectrum. Late last year, I finally worked up the courage to discuss this possibility with my psychiatrist, and she gave me a referral to someone to start the diagnostic process, but my path to finally receiving a formal diagnosis and the comfort that official status would have afforded me was curtailed in December when I suddenly lost my job, and then it was further torpedoed when the pandemic started. Part of the problem with self-diagnosing is having to convince others that you aren't just misreading your symptoms. This is especially hard to do when most of the portrayals of people on the spectrum on television and in film are written by, directed by, and acted out by people who are not on the spectrum. A product of this lack of representation is that the public at large is exposed to only one autistic archetype that has little basis in reality. If you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. No two people have the same iteration of the condition, because autism isn't necessarily a linear spectrum that moves from autistic as fuck on one side to only slightly autistic on the other. Autism is more of a web of interlocking traits that people rank either higher or lower on, and if you ever meet someone with autism and say something along the lines of like, "Oh, wow, you don't seem very autistic to me," you should keep your mouth shut for the rest of the day, because although that person may not seem very autistic to you, it's likely because they have spent years, like I have, learning how to mask their symptoms so they can more easily exist in a world run by neurotypicals. And I know you're probably wondering, but no, I no longer smell my hands. Although to this day, if I accidentally catch a whiff of cucumber melon, I'll be automatically propelled into an existential K-hole.
whistle. It's nice. I mean, hi. You know, sometimes you just vibe with somebody, and you can't help it. Sorry. You can't help it. There's just something about them. And you picture your whole life together. You get married, get an apartment or a home, and go on road trips and get a dog or baby. I don't know, whatever you're into. But sometimes they just get away. This is The Gay Love That Got Away, written by Bellum and read by Evan McCarley. And yeah. So I'm sorry about that. Did you? You're together. Oh, you just got married. Okay. All right. Okay. Sorry. This is just honeymoon. I didn't know you were wearing a suit, dude. Who comes to a bar on their wedding? Bye. Congratulations.
I'm flying high, but I've got a feeling I'm falling for nobody else but you. You caught my eye, and I've got a feeling I'm falling. Show me
The Gay Love That Got Away, written by Bellum and read by Evan McCarley. I was a newly budded 21-year-old out on the town with my family. We went to Hamburger Mary's, which is a gay bar and a performance venue. My mother lied to my brother and said we were in the Swedish district. We were in the gayborhood section of Chicago, Illinois. My brother is part Swedish on his father's side, so she took that to draw him into the gay part of Chicago. He was hesitant to deal with any and all things gay, but went with us to celebrate his Swedish heritage. There were men in flamboyant wear, sparkly glittery shirts, and shining with all their rainbow joy worn proudly. He felt like he was in a version of Rainbow Hell. I felt immediately at home, at peace, and in my element. My family seemed to think that watching gays was something to make their day, like watching something in a cage I would feel. Even though I was bisexual at the time, I was much more attracted to women than I was to men. This caused a conflict within me because I was raised in a predominantly private Christian school setting. Yikes. I also realized women were much more intimidating to talk to. I was aggressive with men, but inherently shy and blundering with women. It's a dilemma I've never conquered. We were watching Baking with Bertha, which is basically an excuse for pies to be filled with cream, laced heavy on the sexual innuendos. And I saw her. She was our waitress, beautiful, a strong personality, and she had a shaved head. I immediately thought to myself that she was attractive. She was attentive, filling up my martinis, and she kept it coming. Her name was Jane, and I tried not to twist my words together, thanking her every single time she came to our table. My family teased me that the gay waitress might be into me. It was a game for them, but for me, it was when I was losing. The night went on, and I planned to get drunk to numb out what they were all saying. Once upon a time, my first relationship with a girl was in my third grade class. We were separated from each other once it was found out that we were together, and I was never able to be with her like the way I wanted to. I didn't see her again. She moved to a different school, and we only randomly met. And I was too young to pursue her, and I didn't have the means to find her. This moment presented itself as a do-over. If only I wasn't with my family. I've never met anyone with my family present. I remember this one moment. I stared at Jane. She was serving this band of girls on a bed together, watching the show, the pie show. The light hit her at just the right light, just like out of a movie. Holy shit, she was stunning. I might have nearly dropped or knocked my martini over with the realization of how gorgeous she was. My stomach twisted in knots. My face was in a constant blushing state. I was a wreck. And trying to play it cool because my family was torturing me through teasing. I downed another martini after that point. I thought about asking her for her phone number. I thought about even striking up a conversation with her. I don't know what it was that drew me to her. It was like an inner strength shining out inside of her like a light. Plus, honestly, she was gorgeous and oozed every feminine beauty I thought I just never had. The show came to an end. I kept drinking probably until past the limit I should. You should never pick someone up after you've been drinking to that point. The teasing from my family didn't stop. I left the addict of Hamburger Mary's and took one last look at her. At this woman who was so attractive, attentive, stunning, all the words I could say and more. I swear the light framed her like a halo, like some sort of mortal angel. I left the doorway and stumbled down with steps downstairs without falling over. I patted myself on the back and tried to seem nonplussed at my family, teasing me. They thought it was funny our waitress might have been interested in me. They said that she was flirting with me, but I was too dense to know, and too shy to ask, and too unsure in my sexuality to know how to do this again. I don't believe in regrets, but my family doesn't know this side of me when it comes to women, or they pretend what they do know never happened. Maybe they'll see this and understand what their daughter is. Or maybe, perhaps, they just won't care in the end. One will never know. Thanks, Sarah.
To a time that you were lost. Thoughts disorganized, can't seem to dry your eyes, and chaos is collapsing from your mind. And you say that you're fine, but now you're out of time. Out of time. You're out of time.
When you were a kid, what did you want to be? Was it an astronaut, a firefighter? I wanted to be a marine biologist at SeaWorld. That dream did not age very well. Okay, I can't say that. What did you want to be when you were a kid? I wanted to be a marine biologist. I wanted to study sharks in the Pacific Ocean. I also wanted to be an astronaut, a reporter, a principal, a sculptor, a lion tamer, and I want to say Oprah. She looked like she had a good job. And for the most part, none of those dreams came true, but I like where I am now, so I guess I'm doing something right. But you know, some people go for it. They become the firefighter, the astronaut, the ballerina. And it's hard work. But they power through. This next story is called The Name of the Game is Pain by Claire McLaunis and read by Devin Will. I hope you enjoy it.
Hi, my name is Devin Will, and I'll be reading The Name of the Game is Pain by Claire McLaunis. Hey, Listen to me, my ballet teacher demanded as he gripped my foot with the strength of a steel vise. I writhed in the anticipation of searing pain. Pain was something I had become accustomed to during my 9 years of training as a young ballerina. In the mid-90s, overstretching hadn't yet become widely recognized as something detrimental to muscular health, in the sense that if you hadn't clearly torn, sprained, or snapped something, you were probably just being a little baby. In other words, the term micro tears and scar tissue therefrom was not common knowledge to most ballet masters and mistresses, and therefore most likely not to their students either. So without the clear understanding of how to stretch my muscles properly, I had invented all sorts of elaborate methods for cramming my limbs into extreme positions, much to the satisfaction of my ballet master. From executing the super splits with my heel propped precariously on the 4th step of the school's staircase while the rest of me dangled below, to attempting to sleep at night in a forward fold which severed circulation to the lower half of my body for much too long, I performed the most ridiculous of feats. Upon arriving home from work one evening, my mom found me lying on the floor of our kitchen with both feet wrapped in leg warmers and rammed under the fridge, and in the attempt to stretch my feet into a more beautiful balletic arc. I was henceforth banned from that practice with a warning that if I was ever found trying that again, I would be banned from the practice of ballet. But the couch is too light without someone lying on it. It doesn't do anything, I complained. I couldn't care less about that, my mom rebutted. If I ever come home to the fridge lying on you, you won't be doing anything ever again. Do I make myself clear? She always had a way of explaining things to me in finite terms I could easily understand. In my mind, killing oneself in the name of ballet would certainly be considered martyrdom, not suicide, and therefore an honorable way to perish. In the views of the ballet world, a small few would have truly cared. The daily experience of physical and emotional pain was an honorable rite of passage for any young ballerina, and which was highlighted by the induction into 2 pink satin coffins, point shoes, with satin ribbons to match. To be a young, aspiring ballerina and not also be a moderate masochist would be quite an unusual thing. Pain is life is the general understanding. With 4 years of point work already under my dance belt, the pain receptors in the nerve endings of my feet had retracted enough for me not to feel as much pain as I once could. Many traditions had been created for the sole purpose of toughening one's soles. For example, rubbing one's feet in rubbing alcohol not only cools swollen, aching feet, but also dries and toughens the skin so that it is less easy to chafe and result in blistering. The first several months of point shoe wearing is an inflamed, blistering affair, even with the necessary precautions and care. Lost or broken nails, corns, bunions, turf toe, sprains, breaks, and yes, of course, blisters are the normal effects of regular point shoe use and the accepted experiences of a professional ballerina. Although I had many more years of training ahead of me, at the age of 14, I was on the fast track to achieving my life dream of becoming a real-life professional ballerina. So I trained as such, attending multiple classes on a daily basis, capped with early morning and late night solo practice sessions as well. My ballet master was a firm believer in cultivating the emotional and physical durability of his students, and so he required his pre-professional female students to wear their point shoes for almost every single class and rehearsal. It must eventually feel as though you are just putting on a pair of loafers, he had once told my class level during a particularly uncomfortable female variations class. He wasn't completely incorrect in that assumption. I had once owned a pair of loafers which bit at my heels almost as much as a pair of point shoes would. As a professional ballerina, your own point shoes almost become an extension of you as a dancer, similar in the way a samurai might feel about their sword. Regardless of this truth, my class and I trusted our master implicitly. One afternoon, during a particularly strenuous rehearsal session at the end of a particularly grueling week, I began to feel an extremely painful sensation in my right big toe. I had been struggling to push myself all the way over the box, the point, of my point shoe, and I turned to my master to explain my impediment. He looked at me with the eyes and face which said everything he didn't need to verbalize. It was the face that said, "Are you gonna wuss out now, like a little bitch?" I had no intentions of becoming a little bitch, and so I repeated the choreography, faltering here and there as the pain in my toe increasingly disabled me. By the end of the rehearsal, dampened by the cold sweat of a pain response, I hobbled to the corner of the studio to assess the damage. As I pulled the shiny pink shoe off my foot, blood seeped through my tights padding into the outside of my shoe. Ah! Fuck! Shit! Fuck! I yelped in pain. I pulled the top of my convertible tights back to reveal a glossy red blister the size of a ripe red cherry sitting just below the nail of my big toe. "What's the damage?" my master asked, as though he were referring to some maintenance needing done on a radiator. I held my foot up for him to get a better look. "Oh, it's a bloody one," he announced with a hint of excitement. "You go and drain the blood out, cut the top off, and wash it off." He directed me to the dressing room to tend to my wound. I did as I was instructed, then returned to the front studio to rest until the next class that evening. Just as I had sat down, my ballet master turned to me. "You know you're not done yet, right?" he asked with a half smirk across his face. "What? Why?" I asked, confused. He pointed towards a half-full bottle of rubbing alcohol next to one of my fellow classmates' shoe bag. "No way!" I yelled. "I'll just let it air out overnight," I pleaded. "If it gets infected, they might have to take the whole toe off." He shrugged indifferently. After much deliberation, I snatched the bottle and shakily attempted to douse my toe in the solution, most ineffectively. "You're wasting it!" one of my classmates named Heather yelled as I poured puddle after puddle onto the floor, miraculously missing my toe each time. "If you can't do it, I'll do it for you," my ballet master sighed, perhaps feeling a shred of pity for me now. "You have to trust me, though," he negotiated, and I slowly nodded my head in agreement. "Give me the bottle," he ordered calmly, as he reached for it, and I cautiously handed it to him. Once my foot was tightly bound in the grip of his arm, and he sat poised to douse it, I would begin crying and laughing simultaneously. He let go of my foot. "I'm not going to help you if you continue like this." He looked at me with his steely gaze. He returned for the second time. He almost never yelled. His power lay in the intensity of his unspoken words. "Go rinse it off again. It's still bleeding," he directed, and I did what I was told. When I returned for the second time, he asked to have a look at it. "I don't think you cleaned it well enough," he stated plainly. He grabbed one of my classmates' spray bottles, which was normally filled with water and used for both slicking back our hair and for softening the vamps of our point shoes. "I just want to clean it better for you," he coaxed me as he grabbed my foot again in his iron grasp. He aimed the nozzle at my bulbous tomato of a big toe just as I caught sight of the bottle of rubbing alcohol, empty to the last drop, and my classmate Heather looking wide-eyed at me from behind the sleeve of her sweatshirt. I squirmed desperately, trying to free myself of his hold as I realized which liquid was actually contained within the spray bottle. "Trust me," he said. "Nothing'll hurt after this." And he counted. 1, 2... And almost as though time slowed to a halt, he pulled the trigger of the bottle repeatedly. With certainty, I can mark that as the moment in my life which ensured that I would never truly trust a white man again. Cue Master of Puppets by Metallica.
I'll be honest, I'm really tired. I started this a couple of days ago, and I am sweaty and I'm hot, and Houston is so humid, and it looks like it's gonna rain, but it's not raining. So everything is like humider. And you know what that means? It means that everybody who puts together this show is working really hard. All the writers, all the readers, all the producers, they put a lot of work into this. So if you want to support them in any way, you can Venmo us at GUST Houston on Venmo. Yeah, send us some cash. It's not like you're using it. I mean, where are you going to go? I'm sorry. But for real though, so send us that money at GUST Houston, at GUST Houston. And if you don't have Venmo, but you still want to support the show, why don't you email us at Storytimehouston, or excuse me, yeah, what is it? grownupstorytimehouston at gmail.com. Send us an email, ask us questions, submit stories, tell us how we're doing, and we'll, I guess, talk back to you. You know, that's how communication works. That's how it works. Yeah, that's how it works. Anyway, hit us up. Send us some cash. Send us a hello. And talk to you later.
semester, and I told her no, I will choreograph my own dances.